about second breakfast.
Time for second breakfast.
What's up, everybody? Monster from Breakdowns for Breakfast here with another second breakfast. I had so much fun talking about NuMetal guitar players, I had to do NuMetal bass players. So today I want to talk about some of my personal favorite NuMetal bass players, some that I think get overlooked, some that I think might get a little bit too much recognition. This is not a definitive list. Just like when I talked about the guitar players, these are guys and ladies that I think are really, really good. They bring something to their band that it's not always about being the best musician, although this is not in any kind of order. I know when I did the guitar players, I kind of had them in categories. I don't really have quite as many bass players here to talk about, so I'm not really going to do anything like that. But there is one clear bass player that I think stands above all the other bass players in this genre. And I'm going to save him for last. I'm not going to say he's my quote-unquote favorite, but I think he is hands down the best. So, but we'll get there. Basically, kind of like when I was thinking about the different guitar players, I was thinking about who really elevates their band by either just being real sturdy in the pocket or adding something that gives their band a unique sound or flavor. And what I found really interesting was, for as hip-hop influenced and rap influenced that NuMetal can be, there's not a whole lot of really funky, like slap bass kind of bass players. There's a few, and I'm going to highlight them. They're some of my favorites. But ultimately, they're really kind of like, you know, guitar driven, which is understandable. But still, I would say I guess I do have one category. We'll start here. These are guys that I don't necessarily think are straight up NuMetal, but have a little bit of new in their music, and they're just too damn good not to talk about. And of course, the first person I'm going to talk about is Peanut from 311. Because, I mean, come on, it's Peanut from 311. I can't talk about bass players and not talk about Peanut. 311 is one of those bands that, they're mixing everything. I've talked about 311 ad nauseum on this show. And I think that, a huge part of their sound is Peanut's bass playing. Now, again, 311's not NuMetal, but they toured with Korn. They just toured with Limp Bizkit. They've got rap and rock and funk and all that mixed in there. So, and I know a ton of rap metal, NuMetal bands point to Peanut as an influence and a source of inspiration. So, got to give him a little bit of a shout out. Similar situation, Flea, Red Hot Chili Peppers. Again, Chili Peppers are not quote-unquote NuMetal, but you can hear the influence, especially like Blood Sugar Sex Magic, like that era and before. Obviously, later albums, Californication, Stadium Arcadium, there's still some funk and some rap and some bounce and groove, but that real slappy, funky bass that Flea had on those first couple records is just, it's a little bit more subdued now. It's a little more chill, but obviously he's still, highly, highly influential in the NuMetal genre. And then, of course, Tim Comerford from Rage Against the Machine. I've got this weird love-hate relationship with Rage Against the Machine because there's so much about them that I love. And for the longest time, I would have told you Tom Morello is one of my favorite guitar players. And he still is. He's extremely innovative. But I just feel like some of their music kind of got repetitive. And the fact that they only did, 3 original records in a cover album, kind of like some of these other bands from the 90s, you wonder if they were to have continued on, would it have gotten better? Would they have changed their sound? Because I felt like by the end of Battle of Los Angeles, starting to get a little bit repetitive. But with all that I say all that to say, Tim is a phenomenal bass player. I don't necessarily love some of the things he's said about NuMetal. Obviously, he hates NuMetal, which is fine. But whether he likes it or not, him and Rage Against the Machine are one of the biggest influences on the genre of NuMetal. So again, if you want to call, I think due to their opinions of NuMetal, I tend to not call Rage Against the Machine NuMetal. I know some people do. It is definitely rap rock. But there's so much other stuff going on in there. And so Tim Comerford, he's kind of I guess I'm calling these three guys the blueprint for NuMetal. But what's interesting is a lot of bass players that come after them just don't have that same level of funk and dexterity, which is not really a knock on anybody. It's just kind of praising those three guys for how talented they really are. Getting into this, there is one guy that I'll talk about first because he's sort of in between the two, and that's Dirk Lance from Incubus, because Dirk is on the first handful of Incubus records, from Fungus Among Us, Science, Make Yourself, and Morning View. And then after Morning View, Crow Left to the Murder and on, they've had a couple different bass players, and the sound changed dramatically. That Incubus, I'm putting them right here as sort of the stopgap because, and then I've got one more guy too, because Incubus, I feel like most people agree, started off as a NuMetal band, but now are a little bit more of their own thing. And a huge part of that was Dirk, because Dirk has some crazy, funky bass stuff. I highly recommend checking out Redefine. If you've never heard that song off of Science, he has this bass solo in there that's really interesting, because you think of bass solos and you think of some like walking around and that kind of stuff, but his is just really like real fast on the right hand, and it's a really unique solo. But yeah, those first couple Incubus albums, I praised Mike on the guitar episode. That Dirk is also a huge part of that. And then also Chi Chang from Deftones, who did pass away a few years ago. He played bass on the first 5 Deftones records, and we've talked about Deftones a bunch of times on the show as well, kind of go back and forth on some of their stuff too, but I will say those first couple of Deftones records I still think are really, really cool, especially Around the Fur. Their second album I think is great. And now Chi didn't necessarily do anything super like flashy or inventive or anything, but his tone and his style added to the flavor of those first couple of records. And I don't necessarily think his passing changed the sound of Deftones. I feel like even when he was still in the band, by that, the album right after the self-titled one was their 4th, and I think the 5th one was Saturday Night Wrist. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry. I'm not up on all my Deftones lore and discography, but I believe they were already shifting their sound. They were already moving into a direction that was kind of their own thing. So, but yeah, those first 3 or so Deftones records I think are great, and I think Chi is one of those guys that's a little underrated when it comes to some of this stuff. All right, let's address the elephant in the room, Fieldy. Is he good? Is he not good? Is he, I've always had a weird relationship with Fieldy as someone who has played bass in some rock bands and stuff before. Is he unique? Yes. Does he have a very distinct sound? Yes. Does that mean he's really good? Not necessarily. I think he is good, and I think his clicking and clacking on the bass definitely helped create the Korn sound that people kind of knew. But I don't know what to say about his playing, honestly, because he does lock into grooves, and when he does, you can tell he's got chops. But there's so many parts on some of those first handful of Korn records. And again, Follow the Leader is probably a top 10 record for me. Like, I love early Korn. But sometimes it's like, what are, you don't even know if he's playing notes. It just sounds like he's hitting the strings and they're flopping around. So it's kind of hard to say, is he good or is he bad? But at the end of the day, Korn, especially those first like 4 or 5 records, would not sound like Korn if Fieldy didn't sound like Fieldy. That's a huge part of the Korn sound on those first couple records. Now, again, talking about how the bass players, for as like rap influenced as some of these bands are, bass players not being super funky, that's not the case for Tra Daniels. And I'm saying Trey, it's Traa, so I don't really know, but he's the bass player of POD. Now, we talked about POD on a couple episodes, and here's the thing. Jason Truby, Marco, they sort of, they had a guitar switch, but Trey has always been there. As far as I know, he's always been their bass player. And he's always held it down. Like he's one of those guys that does have some funky chops, but never goes overboard. Like if you listen to stuff like Rock the Party, you can hear like the little like flares in some of the stuff that he's playing, but he never goes super like slap funk. Maybe he does here or there. I'm not, the biggest connoisseur of POD, but I have seen them live a few times. I've listened to most of their records, and I've always thought the bass on them is solid. Marcos and Jason have, these like kind of soaring lead lines that were real atmospheric and not super flashy, but had sort of that like Santana Garcia kind of like, even Tim Mahoney from 311, kind of like melodic. They can shred a little too, but they're very melodic, catchy kind of solos. And to do that, you need a nice, like full low end to really like, cover up the sound there. And Trey Tra does that. Daniels does that really well. And I think that, especially on this first, again, I'm real familiar with POD up to about Testify, and then I start to kind of lose it. But I think fundamental elements of Southtown, the bass isn't super prominent on Satellite, but there's a lot of really good songs on that record. And then obviously the Jason Truby years of Payable on Death and Testify, I think are great, really solid records too. And I think Daniel's bass playing is a big part of that. Another bass player that I'm going to kind of put in the same category as Fieldy is Raina Foss from Coal Chamber. Now, she's on the first 3 records. Then she kind of had some issues. If you want to know more about some of that, you can listen to my deep dive into the Coal Chamber's history on a previous Second Breakfast. But she's on the first 3, and she's one of those bass players that again, maybe she can do some other stuff, but just from what's on record, she's kind of a basic bass player. But she has a great tone, and she has a great stage presence. And when I did that Coal Chamber history, I mentioned that Dez and Meigs, they kind of wanted to go the route of White Zombie, and they just wanted to have a female bass player. So that was sort of like, not necessarily a gimmick, but that's what they were looking for. And she could have just been a pretty face that stood there and played bass, but she was not. She threw down just as hard as the guys did. And if you go back and watch a lot of those old, from Ozfest, those old Coal Chamber performances, Raina is a lot of fun to watch. She really, really throws down. And speaking of female bass players, not exactly NuMetal, but again, toured with Korn, Lindsay from Mindless Self-Indulgence. Very similar. Never did anything super flashy. Never, you're never going to listen to a Mindless Self-Indulgence song and go, man, that bass line was great. There's so much wacky stuff going on. But again, she had a tone and then an incredible stage presence. So it just so happened that these both happen to be female, but I think Raina and Lindsay both do a real good job of playing what needs to be played, filling the void in the sound, but then also adding so much to the live performance. I've seen some performances with Nadja. oh gosh, I can't remember her last name, but the current bass player of Coal Chamber, she's also really talented. But this early iteration of Coal Chamber, the self-titled record, chamber music in Dark Days, I mean, those are really influential for me. I really like those records a lot. And Raina, even though she didn't stand out on those albums, her bass tone and then again also her stage presence were a big part of Coal Chamber in those days. And same with Lindsay. If you go and watch a couple of clips of Mindless Self Indulgence live, you'll see her. She'll bend all the way backwards to where the top of her head's almost touching the stage. She's jumping off of amps. Like she was intense. And Mindless Self-Indulgence, everybody in that band was intense. So the fact that she could command her own attention was very impressive. So yeah, just want to give her a shout out as well. Okay, splitting hairs a little bit here, but you know what? I'm wearing an Issues t-shirt, and I don't know when I'm going to get to talk about this dude again. So Skylar Accord from Issues. Okay, first of all, I don't care what kind of music you like. Whether you like nu metal, jazz, funk, pop, whatever. Skylar is one of the best, most talented, versatile bass players I have ever heard. He is so damn good. He was on tour, I think it was, I want to say just a couple years ago, he toured with 21 Pilots because they needed a bass player, and he's just that good. But no, those Issues records, I stand by them. I don't want to get into the controversies with Tyler and all that nonsense, but just strictly based on the music and what's on those records, I absolutely love them. They're one of my absolute favorite bands of all time. And a huge part of that is Skylar Accord's bass playing because he is so talented, but he's also so tasteful. He knows when to funk it up and he knows when to pull it back. And not a lot of bass players can really do that. And he's one of the best. I've said many, many times that Beautiful Oblivion, their last record that they did is probably my favorite. But if you go back to Headspace, I believe the song is called The Realist. It's the first song on the record. He has a little bass solo near the end. So good. So absolutely good. Skylar Accord rules. And I hope he gets into a project soon that is similar to Issues where we're mixing the heavy riffs with the funky bass a little bit more because I do miss that band. I really, really do. Now I'm going to name a couple of maybe lesser known guys before I finish off with my big... I said I've got one, but I actually got two. I got two guys that I think are a little bit above the rest. But we'll start with these two that are a little bit underdogs. I haven't mentioned this band on the show very often, but there was a nu metal band from back in the day. I don't even remember how I got this CD. I'm pretty sure it was Record Exchange or something. Might have been in the $1 bin. And I used to look at the album covers and just be like, okay, and I would flip it over and be like, okay, what record label are they on? What do they look like? Does this look like a band I would enjoy? And somewhere along the line, I found a band called Nullset. And Nullset, they've only did one album. Their original band name was, I think, Gangsta Bitch Barbie, I think is what it was called. But they've released one album. I believe it's self-titled. But you can find it on Spotify and stuff. Just within the past few years, they actually put it up on streaming. But their bass player, his name was Jim Shippey. Very fun bass player. Not super flashy, but these guys are rap rock, and he does add some flavor and funk here or there. If you are a fan of, if you're a fan of bands like Primer 55, Factory 81, Darwin's Waiting Room, like those kind of rap rock bands, Head PE, even something like Lifer or Reveille, like if you like that flavor of nu metal that's a little bit more rap and then like funky rock behind it, if you've never heard Nullset, I highly recommend them. I think you would dig them. It is a like, at least for me, I feel like when I listen to the record, I can kind of hear why it didn't blow up like some of those other bands that I mentioned. And even some of them didn't really blow up. They just had a little bit more longevity. But I think a lot of people sleep on Null Set, and they shouldn't, because they're really, really good. And that album is a lot of fun. So if you haven't heard it, check it out. And then I'm going to throw out Kurt Blankenship, better known as Kid Bass. He is the bass player for Head PE currently. He joined back in like 2015. So I've seen him with the band 2 or 3 times. But he is stupid talented. He is so damn good, it's not even funny. If you go to his Instagram page, there's tons of clips of him playing all kinds of other stuff. Peanut follows him on social media and comments on his stuff all the time. He is so good. And he's got a lot of, he's got stage presence. He's a lot of fun to watch. He's a very, thing I like about Kurt is he plays, like when Head PE does their older songs, he plays what you're familiar with, but he does it in his own way that adds some flavor. Now, I will give a shout out to, I believe it's Mawk, M-A-W-K. He was the bass player for Head PE for a very long time. I think he's on the first 7 or 8 records. If you didn't know, Head PE's got like 20 albums out. But he was the bass player on Broke and Blackout and Only in America, and sort of that, I don't want to say the golden age of Head PE, but like when people think of like Head PE on album, that's usually the kind of, those albums are what they're talking about. And Malk, he was, I think his name was Mark something. I don't know. Sorry. I didn't write it down. I'm sorry. But Kurt has been the bass player since like 2015, I think. And I don't know that he's on, he's probably on some of the newer albums, but I mostly just know him from seeing his stage performance. And I follow him on social media. He's a good dude. He's a really nice dude, and he's a great bass player. He's been a lot of fun to watch with this, newer iteration of Head PE. All right. So here's my 2 MVPs. I'm going to start with the runner-up, Mr. Sam Rivers from Limp Bizkit, R.I.P. I talked about Sam Rivers on another Second Breakfast when he passed, kind of giving him some flowers. I'll do it again here briefly. Fred Durst has this huge personality. Wes Borland has this incredible get-up stage, outfits and everything. Sam could easily get lost in the shuffle. And I think sometimes he does. Because even though he's weird, even though he used to wear weird contacts and had kind of an odd stage persona, his bass playing speaks for itself. So many of those riffs that we love from Limp Bizkit would not work if Sam Rivers did not put the bass lines that he did. Him and John Otto lock in a way that very few bass players and drummers can, especially in NuMetal. That's not something you hear. Oftentimes, NuMetal bands, you think about groove and bounce, but you don't hear the word tight very often because that's not a staple of NuMetal. No one's going to say David and Fieldy were super tight. That wasn't part of the Korn sound. But Limp Bizkit, Sam and John were always tight. Sam Rivers, highly, highly underrated. One of the most underrated bass players in this genre and in general, because he was super talented and really could play his ass off. And he just got overshadowed by the personalities in the band, which is easy to happen when you've got guys like Fred Durst and Wes Borland and even DJ Lethal from House of Pain. So, Sam, I think he was a little quieter. But his bass spoke very loudly. And I'm very curious to see what Limp Bizkit does moving forward. I've seen a couple of posts and rumors, but I'm not. I saw the kid who was playing bass on that tour they did with 311, and he was good, but I don't think he's like the bass player. I think he was just for that tour. So we'll see what happens. And then, if you haven't guessed already, the one that I think is just leaps and bounds past all of these guys, Ryan Martini from Mudvayne. What is there to say? I mean, he transcends genre. He plays things that most bass players cannot play. And I'm not talking about in rock and metal. I'm talking about in jazz and in funk and in all of these other genres. Ryan Martini is in a league of his own. As much as I like some of these other guys, Ryan's playing is just otherworldly. And then when you see the whole package, when you see him on stage with Mudvayne, with the costumes, with the energy, it really feels otherworldly. Obviously, everybody knows the brr brr ding from Dig, which is iconic in heavy music. But if you go back and listen to some of the bass lines on that first album in general, like a good example of what makes Ryan Martini cool is there's a song, I think it's track 3 on LD50. I think it's called Internal Primates Forever or something like that. And the guitar riff is just it's just super basic power chords. And when the verses come in, it stays relatively simple. Not Ryan. Ryan is going all over the place and making all of these weird noises and stuff. And that's the thing about Ryan is he can lock in and groove, but he's also got so much talent that he can just create his own universe. And speaking of which, if you're not the biggest fan of heavy music and you want to hear Ryan Martini and just see how damn good he is, check out Scale the Summit. That is a side project with him and a couple other guys. I think it's just a 3-piece. I don't know the other guys' names off the top of my head, but he's the bass player, and it's very like avant-garde. I don't want to call it jazz, but it's not really jazz, it's not really gent, but it is in that ballpark. Like if you're into bands like Animals as Leaders, Polyphia, Chon, it's not a one for one, but you'll kind of get the idea. It's instrumental, but you can really hear Ryan Martini, showing off his flashiness without having to listen to Chad screaming and those things, if you're not into that. But yeah, I think especially LD50, there's because here's the thing, Ryan Martini never doesn't show off. He's super talented. Every record he does some great stuff. But there's something about the mix of LD50. His bass tone is really neat because it's big, but it's also a little bit like, it's not farty. I don't know the right term for it, but it's got this extra little flubbiness to it that kind of gives it its own flavor, which makes sense because, the guitar and the drums and the vocals, especially on that first Mudvayne record, are so brass and heavy and distorted that it makes sense that his bass would be a little bit of a different sound. But yes, Ryan Martini, in my humble opinion, the most talented bass player in this genre. Now again, clearly there's some bands I didn't mention. Clearly there's some bass players I didn't mention. That doesn't mean I don't like them. Doesn't mean I don't think they're good. It's just these are the ones that kind of stood out to me over the years. But please, tell me who I missed. Tell me why I'm stupid for not including them. I'd love to have that conversation. I love it when you guys interact and talk about this stuff with me. As much fun as I like to just yell into the void and hope people are listening, it makes me feel even better when you guys respond back and kind of have a conversation. That's the most fun. So anyway, hope you enjoyed this. I did guitar players. I did bass players. I wonder if I should just keep going with this. We'll see what happens over the next couple weeks. But anyway, I hope you had fun hanging out, and I hope you have a great day.